Why did she always wait for the wind to speak before she pulled the trigger? No one really knew her, not in the way that mattered. They called her a sniper, a ghost, a phantom soldier whose name existed only in the classified margins of reports. But before all the medals that never came, before the myths whispered in military bars, there was just a woman standing alone in the mountains of Afghanistan, watching the dust rise like ghosts from the earth. The day had begun like any other, the horizon burnt orange, the air dry and electric with the hum of war. Somewhere below, a convoy crawled through the valley, 3 trucks and a black SUV in the middle. Their target, a warlord responsible for over 200 American deaths, a man whose name carried blood. Inside the cliffside outpost, the SEAL team waited for a miracle. Lieutenant lowered his binoculars, his voice sharp with disbelief. 3,000 meters, that's insane. No one's got that range. Then a calm voice cut through the noise, soft, steady, almost detached. I can. Heads turned. She stood at the doorway, sunlight pouring across her shoulders like a halo carved from sand and steel. Her hair short, wind-tossed, the color of dust. Her uniform plain, nameless. Only the faint outline of an old insignia stitched on her sleeve, faded but not forgotten. And slung across her shoulder, the M107.50 caliber sniper rifle, the kind of weapon that didn't forgive mistakes. Stared, "You're the sniper." She didn't answer at first, just walked past him, every step quiet, deliberate, as if the ground itself respected her silence. She set the rifle down on the sandbag wall, adjusted the bipod, and only then spoke. "Captain Row," she said softly, "call sign Valkyrie." The name hit the air like a whisper of something sacred. Every SEAL in the room had heard it, rumors, half-stories. The woman who'd saved an entire Marine company in Iraq with 5 bullets. The one who could read the wind like language. But no one ever proved she existed. Until now. She laid flat, cheek pressed against the stock, scope glinting under the Afghan sun. The rangefinder blinked back at her, 3,247 meters, crouched beside her. That's impossible. Didn't look up. Wind 12 clicks northwest, mirage low, barrel temp steady, her voice barely above a breath. You'll want to mark the time, 3 seconds delay. 3 seconds, frowned. You're saying the L take 3 seconds to hit. She gave the faintest smile. If I do it right. The air seemed to tighten around them. The world below moved in slow motion. The convoy winding through the valley, sun flashing on the SUV's roof. His voice was low now, a mix of awe and unease. You've got 1 shot, Valkyrie. That's all I need, she murmured. And then silence. The kind that only exists before something irreversible. Exhaled slowly, the air leaving her lungs like a prayer. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Somewhere far below, the world turned, unaware that a single heartbeat above, history was about to be rewritten. The roared. The mountains echoed with thunder. Then came the waiting. 1 second, 2, 3. A distant explosion bloomed against the ridge, a fireball rising in slow motion, painting the sky in dust and orange flame. The SUV was gone, the warlord gone with it. The SEALs erupted. Some shouted. Some stood frozen, mouths open. Others just looked at her, the woman who had done the impossible. Blinked, unable to believe it. Holy hell, you hit that. Pulled the bolt back, the metallic click loud in the stunned silence. The spent casing rolled into the dirt beside her. Target neutralized, she said calmly. Mission complete. No smile, no celebration, just that same steady calm, the kind that doesn't come from arrogance but from experience. The kind born of loss. That night the team returned to base. No fanfare, no debriefs with medals and flags, just a quiet ceremony, a few men standing under a flickering bulb, the smell of dust and oil in the air. Approached her, still trying to find words. I've worked with the best, he said quietly. Delta Recon Special Warfare, but I've never seen a shot like that. Who taught you?" Paused, wiping her hands on a rag, the faint metallic scent of gun oil lingering in the air. "My father," she said finally. "He was a sniper, Vietnam." Tilted his head. "What he teach you?" She looked down, almost as if speaking to herself. "He used to tell me, don't aim for the body, aim for the truth." The lieutenant frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Gave a faint shrug. "Every shot tells a story, you just have to listen." She didn't say more, she didn't have to. But later that night, when the lights dimmed and the base quieted, she sat alone outside her quarters, beside her, a half-empty mug of black coffee cooling by her boot. The stars above Afghanistan were so bright they almost looked alive. She watched them without blinking, as if searching for something among them or someone. Her fingers brushed the small tag that hung from her neck. 2 names etched into the metal, though only one still lived. The other belonged to her brother. A Marine. Killed near years ago, bled out in her arms before medevac arrived. That was the day she learned what helplessness truly felt like. The day she stopped being afraid of dying and started being afraid of failing. She had joined special operations not for glory, not for rank or recognition, but for redemption, for control, for the one thing she hadn't been able to give her brother, the chance to come home. And so she became the weapon no one believed existed, the woman who never missed. But even perfection has a price. She still remembered the way her father's hands used to tremble when he came home from Vietnam, the way he'd sit on the porch cleaning his old rifle for hours in silence. She never understood it then, the ritual, the stillness. Now she did. Cleaning the rifle wasn't about maintenance. It was about memory, about washing the ghosts off the barrel before the next sunrise. And as she worked through the familiar rhythm, bolt, chamber, wipe, oil, repeat, she realized something. She wasn't cleaning the weapon. She was cleansing herself. Somewhere inside, she still believed there was a piece of her worth saving. She just didn't know if that piece would survive the next mission. That night the wind shifted, soft, distant, carrying the faint echo of her shot across the valley. The same shot that would become legend, even though she never wanted it to. In the days that followed, the story began to spread in whispers. The woman who made the impossible shot, the sniper who outshot God. Her name never appeared in reports, but soldiers talked. They always did. Still, for Row, legend meant nothing. Because she knew the truth, legends don't sleep well. They wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, hearing the shot again and again in their mind. The recoil, the silence, the waiting. And somewhere in that silence, she could still hear her brother's voice. "Don't aim for the body." Her eyes opened. "Aim for the truth." The next morning she stood on the shooting range before dawn, alone, the horizon just starting to burn pink. She raised the once more, but this time she didn't fire. She just looked through the scope, breathing steady. Because for the first time she realized the target was never the enemy. It was herself. What makes someone keep fighting when the war inside is louder than the one outside? Used to ask herself that question every morning. In the quiet moments before the sun rose over the desert, before the first helicopter blades cut the air, before orders, targets, or coordinates, there was that question, a whisper in her mind she could never silence. She'd tell herself it didn't matter, that she was trained to follow through, not feel. But some mornings, when the air was too still and the memories too close, she could almost hear her brother's laugh echo through the dust. "Come on, don't aim at the cans, aim between 'em. That's where the truth is." That was before the fire and chaos that turned her world into ash. It had been 14 years earlier. She was just 21 then, a field medic attached to a Marine recon platoon. Her brother, Corporal Lyanna Row, was her shadow. Same unit, same fire, same fearlessness that made him the kind of soldier men followed into hell. They were pinned in a narrow street outside's industrial zone, smoke thick, bullets slicing through the air like wasps. The call came through that it was inbound. Too close. Too soon. "Pull back," Aaron shouted, but saw the wounded ahead, 3 men caught between walls of crumbling concrete. She ran. She could still remember the heat of that moment, the sound of her heartbeat louder than the gunfire. Her brother's voice behind her, yelling her name. Then the flash, the explosion, the deafening silence that followed. When she opened her eyes, the street was gone. Just fire, dust, and the taste of blood in her mouth. She turned, found Aaron lying against the wall, his vest shredded, his face pale. She pressed her hands to the wound, whispering, "Stay with me, please, stay with me." He smiled weakly. "You never listen, do you?" Then his hand touched her cheek, trembling. "Don't aim for the body." She tried to stop the bleeding. She screamed for the medevac, but by the time the chopper came, his eyes were already still. That was the day she changed. The day something inside her went cold. The day she stopped waiting for orders. Years later in Afghanistan, she still carried his dog tag on her chain, always tucked beneath her shirt, close to the skin. The metal was worn smooth, the engraving faded from years of sweat and time. That morning she found herself sitting outside the range, watching the sun break over the horizon. The wind brushed through her hair. In the distance, a convoy rolled past the base, young soldiers laughing in the back of a Humvee, faces still untouched by the kind of ghosts that lived in her. Lieutenant walked up beside her, coffee in hand. He didn't say anything for a while, just watched the light rise across the valley. Finally, he broke the silence. "You've got that look again." "What look?" "The one people get when they're somewhere else." She smirked faintly. "Maybe I am." He took a sip, nodding. "You ever talk about?" Her body tensed. "How do you?" He shrugged. "I read reports. You were there, lost your brother." She didn't answer. The wind carried the pause between them, a pause heavy enough to feel like gravity. Then she said quietly, "I didn't lose him, I failed him." Turned. "You can't blame yourself for that." Looked down at her hands, steady as stone, though her voice trembled. "He died trying to pull me back. If I'd listened, he'd be alive." He started to reply, but she cut him off. Don't tell me it's not my fault. You weren't there." The lieutenant looked away, jaw tight. He knew that tone, the kind that came from people who'd carried guilt so long it became armor. For a moment neither spoke. The wind filled the silence, whispering through the tents. Then stood, picking up her. "The past doesn't change. The only thing I can control now is the next shot." And just like that, she walked off toward the range. Later that day, found her lying prone again, eyes through the scope, calm, detached. The rifle rested steady on the bipod, her breathing perfectly synchronized with the rhythm of her heartbeat. He watched her for a while before speaking. "You know, most people flinch when they pull the trigger." "I don't," she said. "Yeah, I've noticed." He hesitated. "But maybe you should." She didn't move. "Why?" "Because if you stop feeling it, that's when you lose who you are." Adjusted her scope, eyes still locked on the target. "Maybe that's the point." The rifle thundered. The distant steel plate rang a heartbeat later, dead center. She lifted her head, expression unreadable. "You want to survive this world, Lieutenant. You learn to become the silence between 2 gunshots." Didn't argue. He just stood there watching her pack up, her movements smooth, methodical, like ritual. He realized then wasn't a soldier anymore. She was something else, something built from loss and discipline, precision and pain. Something no war could break, because she was already broken. That night found himself replaying her words, "Aim for the truth." He didn't understand it, not really, but there was something about the way she said it that lingered. It wasn't philosophy, it was confession. When he checked the roster later, he saw her name wasn't listed under any active sniper unit. No assignment, no unit patch. She wasn't supposed to exist. And yet here she was. He went digging, quietly. Old files, cross-mission logs, training records. Most were redacted, but one line stood out: Project Valkyrie disavowed. He stared at it for a long time, the classified tag glowing at the top. Then he shut the file. Some truths, he realized, were never meant to be found. A week later, the team was deployed again, mountain sweep, high-risk intercept. Intelligence had picked up chatter about a new insurgent leader moving through the valley. Same terrain, same wind. Was there, quiet as always, cleaning her rifle with that same slow rhythm, her gaze distant. Approached her before they moved out. "You ready?" "I'm always ready." "Doesn't mean you're fine." She gave a faint smile. "I stopped being fine a long time ago." As the team loaded up, leaned against the Humvee door. "You ever think about leaving?" Looked up at the endless sprawl of rock and dust. "And do what? Live normal. People like me don't go home, Lieutenant. We just stop fighting when there's no one left to shoot." The words hung between them, sharp and heavy. When the convoy reached the ridge, the sun was bleeding into the horizon, gold light flickering off the rifle barrels. Moved like a ghost through the shadows, her steps silent, her eyes scanning every shimmer of heat across the valley. Her voice came through the comms. "Thermal contact, 5 targets, possible escort for primary." Whispered back, "Confirm." She adjusted her scope. "Negative, mirage distortion high, need 30 seconds." Those 30 seconds stretched like eternity. Knelt beside her, watching her expression. She didn't blink, didn't breathe. Then her voice dropped lower. "Got him." She fired. The shot cracked through the valley like thunder. Then silence. A second later, the convoy below erupted in panic. The primary vehicle swerved, soldiers scattering. The mission was over before it began. But this time, when the dust settled, didn't move. Crawled up beside her. "You good?" Her hands were shaking, not much, just enough to see. She blinked, exhaled slowly. "Yeah," she whispered, "I'm fine." But she was. Because through the scope she'd seen something. A glimpse in the SUV's mirror before the shot landed, a boy, maybe 12, wide eyes staring out the window, then gone. That image wouldn't leave her, not for hours, not for days. That night she didn't sleep. She sat outside her tent, staring into the dark. Her rifle lay beside her, untouched. Found her there just before dawn. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She didn't look at him. "How old were you when you stopped dreaming?" He frowned. "What?" She turned, eyes hollow. "Because I think I just did." Knelt beside her, unsure what to say. The wind moved softly through the camp, cold, indifferent. His voice was barely a whisper. Sometimes the shot doesn't echo in your ears, it echoes in your heart. When the report came in the next morning, the kill was confirmed. High-value target, mission success. But didn't feel victory, she felt nothing. And for the first time, she realized what her father had meant. Don't aim for the body, aim for the truth. Because the truth wasn't the shot. It was what came after. The silence. The reckoning. The reminder that every bullet had a name, and sometimes it whispered it back. When a soldier starts questioning the mission, what happens to the mission? Stared at her reflection in the tent mirror, cracked, dust-streaked, its edges warped from heat. Her own face looked foreign to her now. The faint line under her left eye, the scar near her collarbone, the eyes tired still, but carrying storms that no one saw. The wind outside moaned softly through the mountains, like a voice that never stopped whispering. The others were laughing somewhere by the vehicles, another successful op, another story to drink over when they got back to base, but didn't feel success anymore. Only the silence that followed it. She wiped her face, exhaled slowly, and began disassembling her. Her fingers worked automatically, each motion crisp, practiced, a ritual that grounded her. Slide, clean, oil, reassemble. But tonight the routine didn't clear her mind. Not this time. That boy's face, the one in the SUV window, was still there. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it again. That fraction of a second before the world exploded. She told herself it wasn't her fault, that he was collateral, a casualty of war. But deep down, a voice whispered back, "You saw him. You fired anyway." She set the rifle down and pressed her hands against her temples, breathing hard. She could feel the guilt crawling beneath her skin, cold and sharp. That was when walked in. He didn't knock. He just stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. "You missed dinner." "I wasn't hungry." He hesitated, then stepped closer. Command, impressed. "They're talking about a commendation." She didn't even look up. "Tell them to keep it." He frowned. She looked at him then, eyes sharp, distant. "You ever look through a scope, Lieutenant? See everything so clearly it hurts?" He didn't answer. "You see their faces," she whispered. "You see what they're wearing, what they're holding. Sometimes you even see what they're afraid of." Her voice broke slightly, though she caught it before it could fall apart. "And then you pull the trigger, and afterward you wonder what they were thinking the moment before you took their world away." Stepped forward, lowering his voice. "You did what you were trained to do." Shook her head. "No, I did what I was told to do. There's a difference." The words hit the air like a quiet detonation. Didn't reply. He just looked at her, seeing for the first time the cracks forming behind her composure. The woman who once seemed made of steel was bleeding quietly from the inside. 2 days later they were back at base. The mission logs filed, reports sealed, but something in had changed, subtle, invisible to most but not to. He noticed it when she skipped the range for the first time, when she stopped talking altogether, when she'd sit outside at night, staring at the horizon long after the others had turned in. Finally, he went to see her. She was sitting on a stack of ammo crates near the hangar, smoke rising from her coffee. Her rested beside her, polished to a mirror sheen. "You keep that thing cleaner than anything I've ever seen," said softly. She didn't smile. "It's all I have that still listens." He leaned against a crate beside her. "You know, most people talk when something's eating at them." "I'm not most people." "Yeah," he said with a faint smirk. "That's kind of the problem." She looked at him, eyes flat but weary. "You ever wonder if the people we kill remember us?" Blinked. "What do you mean?" She traced a finger along the rifle barrel, her voice distant. "When I close my eyes, I see them. Not their faces, their silence. Like the moment after the shot doesn't end. It just stays." He didn't have an answer. He just sat there, the weight of her words settling heavy between them. Then she added quietly, "My father used to say war teaches you who you are. He was wrong. It teaches you who you can live without." Weeks passed. Missions came and went, each one successful, each one chipping away a little more of what remained of her. Rumors spread through the ranks. Some called her the ghost of, others swore she could feel wind shifts before they happened. But the truth, the real truth, was simpler, sadder. Row wasn't chasing glory. She was chasing silence. And no matter how far she went, she couldn't find it. Saw the decline before anyone else did. The 1,000-yard stare that lasted too long. The sleepless nights. The way she'd flinch at sudden noise but show no reaction to pain. Then one night he found her on the range again, alone, no spotter, just her and the scope. The moon was high, the desert silver. He stood behind her quietly, watching her aim at a target that didn't exist. "There's nothing out there," he said softly. Her finger rested against the trigger. "You sure?" He took a step closer. "You need to stand down." She didn't lower the rifle. "If I stop shooting, I start remembering." Her voice cracked then, the first time he'd ever heard it waver. "I can't remember anymore. Not the faces of the men I saved, not even my brother's voice. Just the noise, just the shots." She finally set the rifle down and turned toward him, eyes hollow. Do you know what it feels like to become the thing you swore to fight? He crouched beside her. You're not that. She gave a faint, tired laugh. Aren't I? I hide, I wait, I kill, and then I pretend it meant something. Don't do that, said sharply. You made choices that saved lives. Her gaze hardened. At what cost? The silence stretched. The desert wind sighed. Then said quietly, You're not broken, Valkyrie, you're human. Stared at him for a long time, then she looked away. Humans hesitate, Lieutenant, snipers don't. A few days later, they were summoned to the command tent. A colonel from Special Operations Command was waiting, flanked by intelligence officers. The air inside felt heavy, the kind that comes before bad news. Captain Row, the colonel said, his tone formal but cold. You're being reassigned. His jaw tightened. Reassigned. Yes, command wants you off active field operations, effective immediately. On whose authority? Pentagon. There's concern your judgment may be compromised. The words hit harder than any bullet. Stepped forward. With respect, sir, she's the best marksman in the field. Not your call, Lieutenant, the colonel cut him off. She's done her duty, now she's going home. Said nothing, she just stood there motionless. Then slowly she nodded. Understood. When the colonel left, turned to her. You can fight this. You've got the record, the reputation. I don't want the reputation, she said flatly. I want quiet. He swallowed hard. What are you going to do now? She looked at him, her expression unreadable. Same thing I've always done. Which is? She slung the over her shoulder, listened to the wind. That night she packed her gear. Each movement deliberate, careful, the kind of slow, final rhythm of someone saying goodbye without saying it. Came by one last time. He stood in the doorway, unsure what to say. Finally, he just asked, Where will you go? She didn't look up. Anywhere the war can't find me. He hesitated. For what it's worth, I don't think the war was ever about who you killed. She glanced at him then, her eyes softening for just a moment. Then what was it about? He exhaled, who you saved. For the first time in months, she smiled, small, fragile but real. Maybe one day I'll believe that. She zipped her bag, slung it over her shoulder, and walked past him into the night. The wind rose softly, carrying dust across the camp as the sound of her boots faded into the dark. Watched her go, feeling the strange ache of losing something you never really had. When the base lights dimmed and the engine stopped, he swore he could still hear her voice on the wind, faint, like a memory that refused to fade. Don't aim for the body. He closed his eyes. Aim for the truth. But didn't go home, not really. She disappeared. For months there was nothing, no reports, just silence. Until one winter morning, a message reached his desk, unsigned, untraceable. It contained only a set of coordinates and a single line. There's one more shot left. He stared at it for a long time, the wind howling outside the window. He didn't know if it was a warning or a goodbye. What would drive someone back into the silence they tried to escape? The message had no sender, no encryption tag, no signature, just coordinates deep in the Hindu Kush, near an abandoned listening post long erased from maps. Lieutenant stared at the numbers for a long time, the glow of the monitor flickering across his tired eyes. There was no doubt in his mind who it came from. Row. The ghost of Valkyrie. He leaned back in his chair, the hum of the ceiling fan filling the silence. There's one more shot left, the message had said. What did she mean by that? A warning, a confession, a plea. He didn't know, but he knew one thing: if Row was reaching out, it wasn't random. She never did anything without purpose. 3 days later was airborne. Officially, he was on leave. Unofficially, he was following a ghost. The transport helicopter dropped him near a mountain ridge blanketed in snow. The pilot didn't ask questions. He'd been given sealed orders, forged by himself. As the rotors faded into the distance, adjusted his pack and began the climb. The cold bit through his gloves, the air thin and sharp. Each step echoed against the frozen stone like a heartbeat. He remembered what she once said, "The wind tells you when to move. If you can't hear it, you're not meant to be there." He wasn't sure he was meant to be here, but he kept moving anyway. By dusk, the trail led him to what looked like a small structure wedged into the mountainside. Stone walls half buried under snow, smoke barely curling from a tin chimney. He knocked once. No answer. Then a voice from inside, quiet, calm, unmistakable. "Took you long enough." He froze. The door opened. Stood there older, thinner, her eyes the same piercing blue that had once stared down a 3,247-meter shot. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks, or maybe years. Her hair was tied back loosely, streaked with gray at the edges. She didn't smile, but her voice softened. "Didn't think you'd come." "I wasn't planning to," said, stepping in, "but you left me no choice." The cabin was simple: wood stove, a cot, a table cluttered with maps and weather charts, and leaning against the wall, polished to perfection, was her. He stared at it. "So it's true, you're still keeping it clean." She glanced at the rifle. "Always." He looked around. "You've been living here." "Off and on." He frowned. "You disappeared off the face of the earth. No records, no trail. The brass thinks you're dead." Lips curved faintly. "That's the idea." He stepped closer to the table, scanning the maps. "You planning something?" She didn't answer, just kept stirring a pot on the stove, the faint smell of coffee filling the air. When she finally spoke, her tone was distant. "There's a convoy moving through the valley tomorrow. Different flag, same enemy. They're moving civilians as shields." Stiffened. "Intel." "First hand." He studied her. "You've been watching them." She nodded slowly. "For weeks." "Alone?" "I've been alone for a long time." He hesitated. "What are you doing?" Her hand tightened on the coffee mug. "What I was trained to do." "You're not military anymore." She looked up, her gaze sharp. "Neither are they." The night fell heavy. Snow drifted against the window. Sat by the fire watching her. She'd changed, but not entirely. Beneath the exhaustion and scars, that same quiet fire still burned. Finally he asked, "Why me? Why send me those coordinates?" She was silent for a long time. Then she said softly, "Because you're the only one who ever saw me as human." Swallowed. "You're not planning on coming back, are you?" Her eyes lifted, meeting his. "Back to what? The reports, the medals, the politics." She shook her head. "I walked away once, but the war didn't." He leaned forward. "Then let me help." She studied him for a long moment, the way someone does when they're measuring risk. Then she said quietly, "You still don't get it. This isn't about orders, it's about truth." He frowned. "You keep saying that. What truth?" Her voice dropped. "The truth about who we become when the mission ends." At dawn, the world was pale blue and silent. Followed her through the ridge, both of them moving low, ghost-like, their breath visible in the freezing air. Below in the valley, a convoy crawled across the snow, 4 trucks, 2 armored vehicles, and a single transport at the center. Through the scope, could see movement inside, civilians bound, frightened. He exhaled. "They're using them as cover." Didn't reply. She lay prone, steady, her eye against the scope. "Target?" asked. She spoke quietly. "Lead vehicle, commander's seat. That's the one controlling the line." "Distance?" 2,800 meters. Hesitated. "That's suicide. You miss by an inch." "I don't miss." She adjusted her elevation, wind correction precise, every movement mechanical. Watched her, the way her breathing slowed, her body sinking into stillness. He realized then this wasn't about redemption. It was about release. He said softly, "You don't have to do this." She didn't blink. You're right, but someone does. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle thundered, echoing through the valley. A split second later, the lead vehicle erupted in flame. The convoy froze, chaos unfolding below. Grabbed his binoculars. Jesus, you hit it dead on. But wasn't watching. She was still looking through the scope, her expression unreadable. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "It's done." He looked at her. "We need to move before they triangulate." But she didn't move. She exhaled, "Go. I'm not leaving you." She turned her head slightly, eyes meeting his. "You have to. This was my last mission." He shook his head. "No, we can together. I'll call it in." "No," her voice hardened. "If they find me alive, they'll make me a story again. Another legend. I'm done being someone else's myth." He stared at her, realizing what she meant. "You're staying." She nodded. "You ever wonder what peace feels like?" He clenched his jaw. "Not like this." Her smile was faint, sad. "This is the only way I know." He stepped closer, his voice breaking. "You saved hundreds. You don't have to prove anything." She looked at him, really looked, and for a moment the hardness fell away. He saw the woman beneath the soldier, the sister, the daughter, the ghost trying to come home. Then she said softly, "Tell them it was worth it. Don't you dare. Go." The first echo of distant gunfire cut the air. The convoy's escort was returning fire into the ridge. Hesitated for one heartbeat too long. Then he turned, grabbed his pack, and ran. When he looked back one last time, she was still there, prone behind the calm, composed, wind in her hair, eyes locked through the scope like she was part of the mountain itself. Then the snow swallowed her. Hours later, stumbled into a safe zone, half frozen, adrenaline still burning through his veins. He radioed in a false report, enemy artillery, lost contact with sniper operative, presumed KIA. They never found a body. Just the rifle. It was recovered days later by a drone patrol, buried in the snow, perfectly clean as if waiting. No blood, no tracks. Just silence. Months passed. Was reassigned, then quietly discharged. No one asked questions. They never did when things got complicated. But at night, he still woke up hearing the wind, the faint sound of a single shot rolling across the mountains. He visited Arlington once, not because her name was there, but because he felt like it should been. He left a single brass casing on an unmarked stone and whispered, "Aim for the truth." Then he walked away. Years later, long after he'd retired, he got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a small, weathered notebook. The first page was blank. The second, a single line in familiar handwriting. "Every shot tells a story. This was mine." Beneath it, a photo. Taken from the mountains. It showed the valley below, empty now, peaceful. No soldiers, no convoys. Just wind and snow. And there, faintly, on a rock in the foreground, a set of initials carved into the stone. Lyanna Row. For a long time just stared at it, not with grief, not with disbelief, but with a quiet understanding. Maybe she hadn't died up there. Maybe she'd just stopped fighting. Maybe that's what one more shot really meant. Not a bullet. A choice. A final act of control in a life that had taken everything from her. He looked out his window, the evening light fading to gray. The wind moved through the trees outside, soft, steady, almost like breathing. And for a moment, he swore he could hear her voice again. Not in words, not in sound. Just in the stillness. Sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is lay down the rifle before the war does. How do you mourn someone who might still be alive? Thought he'd finally buried that question somewhere in the quiet of his retirement, in the dusty corners of a life spent trying not to remember. But ghosts have a way of finding those who still owe them answers. It started with a letter. No name, no return address, just a government seal and a short message printed in clean type. You are cordially invited to attend the dedication ceremony of the Valkyrie exhibit, National Museum of the United States Navy. Froze when he read the name. It had been nearly 8 years since the mountain, since that last transmission, since he'd walked away from the ridge and never looked back. Row. He read the line again, Valkyrie exhibit. He didn't know whether to feel pride or guilt. The next morning, he packed a small duffel, pressed his uniform for the first time in years, and boarded a flight to Washington. The museum smelled of polish and quiet reverence. He walked through corridors lined with stories of valor, names he knew, names he'd fought beside, names that had long since turned to legend. Then he saw it. A glass case under a soft light. The M107's rifle. He stopped several feet away, breath caught in his throat. It looked exactly as he remembered it, black finish glinting faintly under the glass, bipod extended, scope capped. Beneath it, a small brass plaque. Captain Row call sign, Valkyrie. Confirmed engagement, 3247 M status, legend. And just beneath that, 5 simple words etched into the metal. Don't aim for the body. And faintly, almost like a secret, meant only for those who knew her. Aim for the truth. Stood there for a long time. People moved around him, tourists, cadets, reporters, but he barely saw them. All he could see was that glass and the reflection staring back at him. He'd buried her once in his mind, but standing there, surrounded by the quiet hum of air vents and whispers, he realized something. Legends don't stay buried. After the ceremony, a woman approached him, mid-40s, short dark hair, military poise that hadn't faded. You must be lieutenant, she said softly. He nodded, former lieutenant. She extended a hand. Commander Garner, Naval Archives. I helped coordinate the Valkyrie declassification. Hesitated, you put her rifle on display. She smiled faintly. It deserved to be seen. He glanced at the plaque, and the story. Her eyes shifted, the story the Pentagon approved. Something in her tone made him pause. You don't sound convinced. Garner lowered her voice. Not everything made it into the file. There were anomalies. He frowned. What kind of anomalies? She hesitated, then gestured for him to follow. They walked down a restricted hallway lined with sealed cases and classified folders. At the end of the hall, she stopped at a locked cabinet, swiped her badge, and opened a thin folder. This, she said, sliding it across the table, was retrieved from the listening post where your report said she fell. Inside was a photograph, grainy, time-stamped days after the incident. His heart stopped. It showed a figure in a winter coat, hood drawn low, walking along a ridge above the valley. The outline was faint, but the rifle slung across the shoulder was unmistakable. That's impossible, he whispered. We found the weapon she couldn't have. Garner looked at him, unless she wanted you to. Stared at the image, disbelief turning slowly into realization. She staged it, he said. She made it look like she died. Garner nodded. That's what it looks like. There were reports unconfirmed, a woman matching her description across several NATO operations. Different, no official record, always just out of reach. Exhaled, running a hand over his face. Why come back now? Why the exhibit? Maybe she didn't, Garner said quietly. Maybe someone else wants her found. That night couldn't sleep. He sat in his hotel room, lights off, the city outside humming like a distant machine. The photo lay on the table beside his coffee. He kept staring at it, at that small silhouette on the ridge, the wind curling around her like a memory refusing to die. He thought about that message she'd sent years ago. There's one more shot left. Maybe it wasn't about a mission. Maybe it was about truth, her truth, and she wanted him to find it. He turned the photo over. Something was written on the back in faint pencil marks, coordinates half erased. He leaned closer. They weren't the same as before, different region, different time zone. He looked them up. Northern Alaska. 2 weeks later, he was there. The wind cut through layers of thermal gear as trudged across a frozen plain. The sun hung low, red and pale through the fog. He followed the coordinates exactly, each step stirring snow over old, forgotten ground. When he reached the marked point, there was nothing, just a clearing, an abandoned ranger station, long since collapsed. He almost turned back. Then he saw it faint, carved into the doorframe of the ruined cabin. V. The edges were clean, recent. He pushed the door open. The air inside was still. A small wood stove, a cot, a desk covered in dust, and on it something wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a notebook, the same kind she used to carry. The first page blank. The second a single line. You can stop looking. Some wars never end, they just change their names. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped to the next page. There was a list of locations, dates, and notations written in her exact handwriting. None of them matched official records, but one line stood out. Operation Glass Dove, incoming strike, civilian interference possible. Stop them before they repeat. He read it again. The meaning sank in like ice. She wasn't hiding. She was still fighting. Off-grid, unauthorized, alone. And somewhere out there, she was stopping something the world didn't even know was happening. Back in D.C. went a Commander Garner with a notebook. She flipped through it, her expression darkening with each page. "This shouldn't exist," she whispered. "Glass Dove was shut down years ago." "Apparently not," said. "She's tracking them." Garner looked up sharply. "You think she's still alive?" He held her gaze. "I think she never stopped being a soldier." She exhaled, closing the book slowly. "If that's true, we're not supposed to find her." "Then we won't," he said. A few days later, a storm rolled over the capital. Stood outside the museum again, rain slicking the glass case that held her rifle. He touched the brass plaque lightly, his reflection mingling with hers. Somewhere out there, he knew she was still watching the horizon, still listening for the wind, still chasing the truth that no one else dared to face. He wondered if she ever forgave herself, if she ever found peace. Maybe peace wasn't what she was looking for. Maybe all she wanted was silence, the kind that comes when a person finally understands the cost of their own legend. As he turned to leave, he noticed something strange on the bottom corner of the display glass, a faint smudge, like a fingerprint. Except it wasn't a smudge, it was deliberate. Etched lightly into the corner, barely visible unless the light hit it right. A symbol. The same V he saw carved into the cabin door. He stared at it, his throat tightening. "Valkyrie," he whispered. And for the first time in years, he smiled. Not because he'd found her, but because she was still free. That night as he drove out of the city, the radio crackled, faint, static-laced. For a second he thought it was interference. Then beneath the static, a familiar voice came through. Soft, calm, measured. He froze, gripping the steering wheel. "Don't look for me," the voice said. "Not this time." He swallowed hard. The line hissed softly, fatting. "You did good," she said. "Keep it that way." And then silence. He waited, but nothing came after that. The signal died, replaced by the whisper of wind over the speakers. He sat there for a long time, headlights cutting through the rain. Somewhere in the static, he could still hear her, not words but presence. A voice made of quiet strength, carrying through distance and time. Because some legends don't die. They just walk into the wind, leaving behind echoes that remind the living what courage really sounds like. And in that echo, finally understood what meant all those years ago. Don't aim for the body. It was never about the target. It was about what you choose to live for when the mission ends. He exhaled, eyes on the horizon. And for the first time in years, he whispered back into the silence. Aim for the truth. What if the enemy isn't the one you fought, but the one who gave the orders? It started quietly, like all buried truths do. A name here, a date there, a few inconsistencies in old reports that didn't line up. And beneath it all, a pattern. Had spent his career following orders, but ever since that night, the voice on the radio, his voice, something inside him refused to rest. He couldn't forget the notebook, the one he found in that frozen cabin in Alaska, with the words that haunted him more than any memory of war. Stop them before they repeat. At first it seemed like code, but the more he looked, the more it made sense because it wasn't just a mission. It was an operation that had gone wrong, terribly wrong. And the only reason it hadn't made headlines was because someone had buried it. He spent weeks combing through archives, old briefings, encrypted databases only people with his clearance could even access. Every file on operation was redacted beyond recognition, pages blacked out, timestamps removed, signatures erased. Except one. A logistics report, dated 3 days before the mission that made a legend. It listed auxiliary cargo in the convoy she had taken the 3,247-meter shot to neutralize. Frowned cargo. He cross-referenced it with field manifests. Nothing matched. No authorization for civilian presence, no humanitarian clearance, no transport logs. Just one ambiguous line. Asset Containment, Directive 43B. He stared at it for a long time. It didn't make sense, not on paper, not tactically. But deep down, a cold understanding began to take shape. That convoy hadn't just been carrying insurgents. It had been carrying something, or someone, the Pentagon didn't want the world to know about, and had been sent to erase it. He drove to Norfolk the next week to see Commander Garner again. She greeted him with tired eyes and a warning before he even spoke. Don't dig. He placed the folder on her desk anyway. I already did. Her gaze flicked to the page, then to him. Where did you find this? Old logistics server, buried deep. She sighed. You shouldn't have. Tell me what Directive 43B means. Garner hesitated. Her silence was the kind that spoke volumes. Finally, she whispered, it was a black program, a joint op between special warfare and private defense contractors. Intelligence experimentation, neural targeting tech, data analysis using combat conditions. They tested it on prisoners. Stomach turned, prisoners. Political detainees, civilians, anyone they could classify as expendable. He stared at her, disgust spreading through his chest, and she was sent to take out the convoy carrying the test subjects. She didn't know. None of the SEALs did, but someone tipped her off after the mission. She found out what she'd done. Sank back in the chair, the weight of realization pressing down on him. That's why she disappeared. Garner nodded slowly. You'd disappear too if you realized the system you bled for made you a weapon against the innocent. The memory of his voice came back to him the night she said, there's one more shot left. He finally understood. That last shot, it wasn't revenge, it was exposure. She was going after whoever orchestrated. And she was doing it alone. He spent the next month chasing her shadow, following trails that vanished the second he touched them. Private airstrips, unregistered bank accounts, encrypted comms traffic in remote regions. Each one led to another ghost. Then one day, he found something different. An intercepted transmission from a remote satellite relay off the coast of Iceland. It was short, broken by static, but her cadence was unmistakable. Phase 3 confirmed. Target D43 executive, no collateral. His pulse quickened. He didn't recognize the code, but the initials matched what he'd just uncovered. Directive 43B. And if she was targeting its executives, she wasn't just hunting the operation, she was dismantling it. He took the recording to Garner. She listened in silence, then looked up sharply. She's not just exposing them, she's killing them. He shook his head. No, not an assassin. Garner's voice was grim. Maybe she was, but ghosts don't come back to warn you. They come back to finish what the living couldn't. Weeks later, a name surfaced: Colonel Wainwright, retired intelligence officer, former handler for Directive 43B. 2 days after his name appeared in a leaked security memo, he was found dead in a hotel room in Oslo. Gunshot wound, no forced entry, no witnesses. Ballistics matched a .50 caliber round. The same model used. The M107. Except hers was sitting behind museum glass in Washington. Or a replica was. His breath caught. He went back to the museum the next morning, pushing past tourists and staff until he reached the case. The rifle sat exactly where it always did, except now, under the light, he noticed something different. The serial number plate. It had been replaced. Faint, newly etched digits glinted under the glass. Not the same weapon. The in the case was. She had switched it before the exhibit. And she was still out there, doing what she did best. That night sat in his car across from the museum, the rain drumming on the windshield. He thought about calling Garner, thought about walking away. But the truth was a living thing now, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. He opened his laptop, replaying the Iceland transmission. The voice, the words, the tone sounded colder, more methodical, but there was still something underneath, something human, something hurting. He paused the recording at one word. No collateral. That was her line in the sand. She wasn't killing innocents. She was targeting the ones who made her one. He stared out the window. Somewhere she was watching this play out. Somewhere she knew he'd find the trail. And maybe that was what she wanted. 3 days later, received a single email. No address, no subject, just an attachment, a photo. It showed a man in a suit, standing outside a private security firm in Geneva. Beneath it, coordinates. He knew what it meant. Another target, another piece of the directive. And then beneath the image, 5 words written in old handwriting. You always listened, didn't you? His chest tightened. It wasn't a message, it was permission. She was inviting him in. He flew to Geneva, rented a car, parked across from the firm's building under the shadow of old mountains. Hours passed, no movement, no sign of her. Then, through the glare of headlights, he saw it, the faint shimmer of glass from a ridge 2 kilometers away. A scope glint. He lifted his binoculars. There she was, lying prone, calm, steady. He could see her silhouette against the sky, the same stillness, the same precision. Through the lens, she looked almost serene. He wanted to call out, but before he could, her finger tightened. The shot cracked like thunder through the valley. The man in the suit dropped instantly. No chaos, no screams, just the echo rolling through the cold night air. Held her position for a moment, scanning. Then, as if sensing him, she turned slightly, just enough for the moonlight to catch her face. Even from this distance, he saw her eyes. Blue calm. And then she disappeared into the dark. Later that night stood on that ridge. The snow was still settling, the air heavy with silence. He found the brass casing where she had been lying, clean, deliberate, placed neatly on a rock. Etched into the metal was a single letter. V. He turned it over in his gloved hand, the cold biting through. And beneath it, 3 more words carved so faintly he almost missed them. Truth finds everyone. He stared out over the city lights below. For a long time he didn't move. Because now he understood. Row wasn't hiding from the system anymore. She had become its reckoning. And for the first time, felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not guilt. Hope. Because maybe, just maybe, there were still people in this broken world who aimed for something higher than orders. People who fought not for glory, but for truth. And maybe that truth needed a ghost to deliver it. He slipped the casing into his pocket, turned toward the horizon, and whispered into the cold wind. Still listening, Valkyrie. The wind answered softly, rolling over the ridge like the memory of her breath. What happens when loyalty becomes treason? That question haunted long after the Geneva shot. He'd seen her. There was no mistaking it, the same precision, the same stillness. Row was alive, and she was still hunting the men who'd built the machine that broke her. But now, she wasn't just killing ghosts of her past. She was erasing the architects of it. Directive 43B. 3 names remained on the classified manifest. He'd memorized them the moment he read them in her notebook. And Sloan, all former intelligence executives, all untouchable. Until Valkyrie came back for them. The world had moved on from wars fought in deserts. Now it was digital, quiet, invisible, deniable. The kind that didn't need soldiers anymore. But knew the truth. There would always be people like those who couldn't sleep because they'd seen too much, and couldn't stop because silence was worse than death. And somewhere inside him, he realized he wasn't just chasing her anymore. He was protecting her. From the world. From the system. From herself. He started small, old favors, old contacts. A data analyst from Fort owed him a drink. A retired CIA linguist owed him a secret. Piece by piece, he began tracing the network. Directive 43B wasn't dead. It had evolved, privatized, sanitized, and repackaged under a new name, Helios Defense Corporation. They weren't running experiments anymore. They were selling them. Behavioral targeting tech, AI-assisted warfare, civilian data used to predict potential threats. Wasn't wrong. The war had never ended. It had just gone digital. Met with Commander Garner in an empty near Arlington. She looked older now, shadows under her eyes, hair streaked with gray. "You're in deep," she said, stirring her coffee. "And I mean way too deep." "I need access to the Helios board roster," he said. She gave him a long, wary look. "You think she's going after them?" "I don't think," he said. "I know." Garner leaned back, exhaling slowly. "And what if she's right? What if they deserve it?" His gaze hardened. Then the truth should expose them, not bullets. She studied him for a moment. "You still think you can save her?" He hesitated. "I think I owe her that much." Garner shook her head. "Saving Valkyrie is like trying to put wind in a cage." He smiled faintly. "Then I'll build the cage out of sky." That night received another message. Encrypted, unsigned, same signature pattern as before. Only one line. Zurich 72 hours, last piece of the puzzle. He knew it was her. He also knew it was a warning, not an invitation. But he went anyway. Zurich was a city of glass and mirrors, perfect for ghosts. Set up near the river, watching the Helios corporate headquarters through binoculars. The building was all steel angles and quiet money, its mirrored surface reflecting the city lights like a weapon pretending to be art. Inside, the final Directive 43B executive, Michael Sloan, was hosting a private dinner with defense investors. Security was airtight, cameras, drones, counter-surveillance. But if it was here, she wasn't going through the door. She'd already be inside. He waited for hours. The wind shifted, the lights dimmed, then a flash of movement on the rooftop opposite. A faint glint of glass. Scope reflection. His chest tightened. "Valkyrie," he whispered. Through the lens, he saw her prone on the edge of a construction platform, snow collecting on her shoulders. Her face was calm, her hands steady. But something was different this time. Her rifle wasn't aimed at the building. It was aimed higher, toward a surveillance drone. She fired once. The drone burst into sparks and smoke. Seconds later, the building's alarms erupted. She wasn't here to kill Sloan. She was here to expose him. A data breach began unfolding across the Helios network, screens flickering, servers crashing. His phone buzzed. One message. Truth is louder than bullets. He exhaled part fear. Then he saw the unmarked SUV pull up across the street. Government agents, black ops. They tracked her. Damn it. He ran. By the time he reached the rooftop, she was gone. The only trace left was a small silver drive resting where her rifle had been. He picked it up, heart pounding. Engraved on the back, her call sign. V. He pocketed it and turned, just as the sound of boots echoed up the stairwell. Hands where I can see them. Froze, two agents in tactical gear swept in, rifles raised. One of them barked, "You're under investigation for obstruction of national security operations." He raised his hand slowly. "You're making a mistake. Tell that to the people you're protecting." They cuffed him, dragged him down the stairs, and into the SUV waiting below. Through the tinted glass, he caught one last glimpse of the skyline, snow falling like ash against the glow of the city. He smiled faintly, because he saw it. Projected on the side of the Helios building, massive, undeniable, were files, documents, and videos. Evidence. Directive 43B civilian experiments, government signatures. Had done it. The truth was out. He spent 48 hours in custody. No lawyers, no answers. Then one morning, Commander Garner walked in holding a file. "You're lucky," she said quietly. "They're not charging you." He leaned back, exhausted, "Because they can't prove anything." She gave him a knowing look. "Or because someone upstairs doesn't want this story anywhere near daylight." He nodded slowly. "She did it, didn't she?" Garner sat across from him. "Helios is finished. The leak went global before anyone could stop it. The files are everywhere now, news networks, watchdogs, even The Hague." She paused. "But they want her too. She's at the top of they'll never stop hunting her." Looked at her, "Then she'll just keep moving. She can't run forever." He smiled faintly. "She doesn't have to, she's already everywhere." Garner frowned. "What do you mean?" He slid the silver drive across the table. "She left this for me. You want to know where she is?" Garner hesitated, then plugged it into her tablet. The screen flickered. Video footage played, aerial drone feeds, overlays of classified documents, names of politicians, contractors, tech companies. At the center of the feed, a message appeared. "Truth doesn't hide, it waits." Garner looked up slowly. "Where did she send this from?" Exhaled. "You're not going to like the answer." He pointed to the metadata at the corner of the screen, live GPS coordinates flashing faintly. It wasn't in Europe. It wasn't in Asia. It was back where it all began. Afghanistan. The Valley. Left the next day. No paperwork, no authorization, just a backpack, his sidearm, and the drive still warm from the computer. Garner didn't try to stop him. She just said one thing as he walked out. "Be careful, ghosts bite when cornered." He smiled. "She's not a ghost, she's the echo of every lie we buried." And then he was gone. The desert greeted him like an old scar. Dry wind, rust-colored hills, the faint smell of oil and dust. He remembered every rock, every valley, every place they'd once fought and bled. By nightfall, he reached the same cliff where she'd made the shot that changed history. 3,247 meters of impossible precision. And there in the fading light he saw it, a small campfire flickering against the wind. A figure sat beside it, silhouetted against the mountains. He froze. Row turned slowly toward him. Same eyes, same calm, same ghostly stillness. She smiled faintly. Took you long enough. Stepped closer. You never did like saying goodbye. I don't believe in them. He sat across from her, the wind whispering through the valley. You did it, Helios, the world knows. She nodded slowly. The world forgets faster than it forgives, but at least now it knows. He looked at her. They'll come for you. They always do. Silence stretched. The fire cracked softly. Finally he asked, why me? Why send the clues? Why make me follow? She looked at him, eyes reflecting the flame. Because I needed someone to remember me right, she said softly. Not as a killer, as a soldier who refused to stay silent. He felt something tighten in his throat. You did more than that. She smiled faintly. Maybe, but it's your turn now. My turn. She stood slowly, pulling her coat. The truth's out there, but it won't keep itself. Someone needs to carry it. He looked up at her, the firelight flickering across her face. Where will you go? She glanced toward the horizon, endless, wild, untamed. Where the wind still talks. And before he could speak, she was gone, swallowed by the darkness, by the desert, by the silence she'd always belonged to. Stood there for a long time, the fire burning low. He finally understood what she'd meant all those years ago. Don't aim for the body. Because the body dies. But the truth lives as long as someone keeps it alive. He looked up at the stars, the same ones they'd fought under, and whispered into the wind. Still listening, Valkyrie. And the wind answered, soft, distant, eternal. What remains when the war ends? The silence, or the truth that survived it. Never saw her again after that night in. He waited by the fire until the last ember died, listening for the sound of footsteps, for the whisper of a rifle bolt, for the voice that had once steadied him through chaos. But the wind only carried the same stillness she had left behind. And somehow he understood she hadn't vanished. She had become part of the silence itself. Weeks turned into months. The Helios leaks ignited headlines across the globe, covert experiments, human testing, the quiet fusion of war and commerce that had corrupted everything once served. But for all the noise it made, the aftermath was predictable. Committees formed, speeches given, the outrage burned bright and faded faster. That's how truth dies, realized, not with denial but with distraction. But somewhere in the chaos, a single video began circulating online. No watermark, no source, just a timestamp and a message. Valkyrie Transmission 8. It spread like wildfire. The footage opened with static. Then the image stabilized, a dimly lit cabin, a camera propped on a metal case. And there she was. Row. Older, gaunter, but unmistakable. Her face lit only by the faint glow of a lantern, her resting behind her, the same weapon, silent and still, like a monument to all the battles that never made it home. She stared into the lens for a long time before speaking. When I was a child, she said softly, my father taught me how to shoot, not for sport, for discipline. He told me the rifle was a mirror. It showed you who you really were when you pulled the trigger. She paused, exhaling. I spent most of my life trying to prove him wrong, but he was right. Her voice was calm, not hardened, not broken, just weary. The kind of voice that carried the weight of too much understanding. I've taken shots I can't forget. Some saved lives, some took them. But what they never told us, what they never taught, was that the hardest part isn't the kill, it's what comes after. She leaned forward, her eyes piercing. Every bullet carries two stories, one for the target, one for the shooter. The world only ever hears one. sat in his small apartment in Arlington, staring at the screen as she continued. I'm not proud of what I've done, but I'm not ashamed either. I lived by orders until I learned who was giving them. Then I lived by something else, truth. She looked down for a moment, as if choosing her next words carefully. People will call me a traitor, a killer, a ghost. They'll say I disappeared because I couldn't face what I did, but the truth is simpler. I disappeared because I finally understood what it means to serve. Not a country, not a flag, but the people who can't fight back. A long pause. Then her eyes lifted again, steady, clear, human. If you're hearing this, then the truth is already free. Don't thank me for that. I didn't do it for you. I did it for the ones who never came home, for my brother, for every name carved into a wall that no one stops to read anymore. Her voice cracked slightly, just once. I'm done fighting the war outside. The real one's always been inside anyway. She leaned closer to the camera. So if you want to honor me, don't aim for the body. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. Aim for the truth. Then the screen went black. The world went quiet after that. No one knew where the video came from or how it got online. The Pentagon called it a deepfake. The networks argued over authenticity. But soldiers, the ones who'd served in the same dust and blood, they knew. Because ghosts don't fake themselves. And Valkyrie had always been real. Months later was summoned too. They were dedicating a new training range, Valkyrie Hill. He hadn't worn his uniform in years, but he went. Not for ceremony, not for pride, just to stand where the new recruits would learn to do what once did, to listen to the wind before pulling the trigger. The instructor leading the tour was young, early 20s, sharp, focused. This is where we teach advanced ballistics and atmospheric correction, the instructor said. The range was named after Captain Row, Navy SEAL, Special Operations, longest confirmed sniper shot in U.S. military history. He turned to, "You served with her, didn't you, sir?" Smiled faintly, "I did." "What was she like?" He looked out at the horizon, the sun glinting off the steel targets, the faint hum of wind rolling through the valley. "She was quiet," he said. "Calm. You could be surrounded by chaos and she'd still find stillness." He paused, but more than that, she listened, not just to the wind but to people, to pain. The young man nodded, eyes wide. "They say no one beat her record." Smiled softly. "Some records aren't meant to be beaten, they're meant to be believed." After the ceremony, he lingered alone on the range. The others drifted away, the sound of their boots fading into the distance. He walked to the highest point, a small ridge overlooking the valley, where the wind cut across the earth like memory itself. And there, on a small stone at the edge of the range, he saw something carved into the rock. 2 letters. LR. He knelt beside it, tracing the initials with his fingers. The engraving was new, fresh. Someone had been here. He looked out across the valley, heart thudding softly. For a moment, he thought he saw movement on the far ridge, just a shimmer, a flicker of light off glass. A scope reflection. Then it was gone. He smiled, still watching her. The wind whispered back, faint but unmistakable, a low hum rolling through the mountains, the same rhythm he'd once heard in Afghanistan. 3 seconds between thunder and silence. Her timing perfect as ever. Years later, long after his hair had gone silver, would sit on his porch in Virginia, coffee steaming beside him, and think of her. Not the legend. The woman. The one who taught him that some truths aren't loud. They're quiet, patient, waiting for someone brave enough to carry them forward. And whenever the wind would shift just right, he'd hear her voice, not as sound but as presence. Not as memory but as proof. He recorded his own message once, never shared it, just stored it in an old recorder, kept on his desk beside a single brass casing with the letter V etched into it. "If anyone ever asks," he said quietly, "what she was fighting for, tell them it wasn't revenge. It was remembrance." He paused, voice softening. She didn't want to change history. She wanted to remind it that we were still human. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. The world builds its heroes out of noise, but the real ones move in silence. He smiled faintly. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. He looked toward the horizon, where the sun was setting in a slow blaze of gold. And in that light, just for a moment, he could almost see her standing there. Slung over her shoulder, wind in her hair. The ghost who taught him to listen. The legend who aimed for the truth. Because legends don't die. They just stop being stories and start becoming lessons. And somewhere, in the quiet between thunder and echo, between duty and redemption, between the body and the truth, Row still waits. Watching, listening, silent as the wind. Sometimes, the last shot isn't fired from a rifle. It's fired from the soul when you finally stop fighting what broke you and start forgiving yourself for surviving.